the most self-serving piece of television I've seen in quite a while. That's not some random hater typing angrily from their phone at midnight. That's a royal editor-in-chief, someone who watches this content professionally for a living, sitting down with a trained, critical eye, and walking away genuinely disgusted by what he saw. And here's the part that should really worry Harry and Meghan's team. That review isn't even close to the worst one they've ever gotten. Every single time the Sussexes release something new, there's this brief little window of hope that opens up. Maybe this is finally the project that changes the narrative. Maybe this is the one that gets people back on their side after everything. And then, almost like clockwork, the reviews start rolling in. And it happens again. Critics don't just dislike their content the way you dislike a mediocre movie. They seem genuinely, personally offended by it, like they expected so much more and got handed something hollow instead. So today, we're going through the harshest, most brutal reactions critics have thrown at Harry and Meghan's projects over the years, all the way up to the very latest one that just landed this week, and we're asking the question everyone in this space is quietly whispering to each other. Is there anything left that can actually make that people genuinely want to watch? Let's start at the very beginning because honestly, the pattern goes back further than most people remember. When their 6-part Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan first dropped, the reviews were savage before the credits even finished rolling on episode 1. Nick Bullen, editor-in-chief of True Royalty TV, called it the most self-serving piece of television he'd seen in a long time, describing it as feeling more like a reality show dressed up as a documentary than any kind of real journalism or storytelling. And it wasn't just one critic having a particularly bad day at the office. Reviewers across both the US and the UK piled on almost immediately, and the recurring complaint wasn't even that the show was offensive or controversial in some scandalous way. It was something quieter and honestly more brutal in its own way. It simply wasn't compelling. Not shocking, not gripping, just boring. Which for two of the most photographed, most talked about people on the entire planet might genuinely be the worst insult a critic can possibly hand out. Here's where it gets uncomfortable though, because it wasn't only journalists piling on anymore. It became the entertainment industry itself turning against them, quietly at first, then not so quietly. Former UTA CEO Jeremy Zimmer said it out loud on the record at a conference in Cannes in front of an audience full of industry insiders. Turns out Meghan Markle was not a great audio talent, or necessarily any kind of talent. Think about what it actually takes for a talent agency executive, someone whose entire job is built on relationships and diplomacy, to say something that blunt, that public, about someone with this level of global star power. That's not a passing dig you brush off. That's an industry insider quietly telling every studio and network in Hollywood, don't bank on this one, no matter how famous the name attached to it is. You'd think, after years of criticism like that piling up, someone on their team would have finally learned the lesson and adjusted course. Instead, it just happened again. This month, according to fresh reporting that's still circulating right now, their latest venture has been described by multiple critics as the worst project they've ever released, and the couple is reportedly facing what insiders are openly calling a pitiful defeat over how it's been received. Same exact story, same painful pattern. Years apart from that original documentary Backlash, and somehow it's gotten worse instead of better. This is what should genuinely worry them at this point, because it's not one bad review anymore, scattered and forgettable. It's an actual track record, and track records are much harder to spin away. Piers Morgan, discussing their content publicly, called their repeated comparisons to Princess Diana's treatment by the press frankly disgraceful, pointing out bluntly that Diana faced roughly 10 times the level of paparazzi scrutiny that Meghan has ever personally experienced in her life. That's not a small criticism to shrug off. That's someone accusing them of appropriating one of the most painful, tragic royal stories in modern history for their own narrative purposes. Even Netflix's own co-CEO Ted Sarandos, while remaining publicly supportive on the surface, described their as-ever business partnership using the word passive, corporate language that, when you actually read between the lines, sounds a whole lot like a company quietly distancing itself before the eventual fall. And that fall came fast, faster than almost anyone predicted. Netflix officially split from Meghan's as-ever lifestyle brand this year, after reportedly investing heavily to help build the brand up from nothing. Variety later reported that the streamer was left sitting on more than $10 million in unsold as-ever product, tea, jam, baking mixes. So much excess inventory piling up in warehouses that Netflix reportedly started just giving it away to employees for free rather than let it keep sitting there. Here's why this latest failure genuinely stings differently than all the ones that came before it. Their original Netflix documentary, whatever critics personally thought of the storytelling, was still objectively their biggest commercial success by every metric that actually matters. It reportedly became the platform's second most watched documentary series of all time. That was the high point the moment everyone assumed would launch a decade of hit projects. Every single release since then has struggled to get anywhere close to that number, and the gap keeps widening instead of closing. So when the newest project gets branded the worst one they've ever put out, that's not just one bad week you can quietly move past. That's a clear downward trend, and everyone actually paying attention to this space can see the shape of it forming. A source close to the situation reportedly told The Sun that Meghan felt Netflix's caution was holding her back from going global, which, translated out of the careful PR language, basically means her side is already trying to explain away this failure before it's even fully landed in the public conversation. There's one more layer to this that rarely gets talked about, and it might actually explain why the pattern keeps repeating itself. Every project they've launched has followed almost the exact same playbook. A big, emotional trailer built around themes of privacy and hardship, a wave of initial media coverage split roughly evenly between curiosity and skepticism. And then, once people actually sit down and watch the finished product, a slow, steady drip of disappointment that spreads from critics to casual viewers to, eventually, their own former defenders. It's not that audiences walk in hostile. It's that the finished product almost never matches the emotional weight of the marketing that sold it to them in the first place, and that gap between promise and payoff is exactly where reviews like "worst thing I've ever seen" start to take root and spread. So here's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this. From that very first Netflix documentary all the way to this newest project, the reviews keep getting worse instead of better, and even the people who used to publicly defend them, the industry insiders who once championed their potential, are starting to go noticeably quiet. Is this really the story of two people that Hollywood simply never understood or gave a fair chance to? Or is this exactly what happens when the initial hype finally, inevitably runs out and reality sets back in? Tell me in the comments which one of their projects you personally think was actually the worst of the bunch, and whether you think there's any real coming back from where things stand right now. And subscribe for more on the Sussexes' increasingly rocky road through Hollywood, because if this pattern holds the way it has every single time before, there's going to be a next one.